right, we have a chair we're working on today, and the legs on this were just absolutely stunning. And I love the natural patina of it. I love the finish that they already have on it. It looks like somebody just kind of tried to sand it down, and then the natural wear after that I thought was fantastic. But they put this material on the seat, and I don't care for that at all. So we're going to go ahead and take that off, and by doing that we're flipping the chair upside down, and then there's just these 4 screws here. So we're going to go ahead and take those 4 screws off and clean up some of those spider webs over there, and then we'll get this recovered and put back together, and we'll get a picture of it for you. Okay, I went ahead and took all the staples off of the back side of this chair, this seat cover, and I'm taking this fabric back, and there is a piece of foam that is on there, and then another piece of batting that's laid over top of that, and everything is in excellent condition. And so we're just going to go ahead and take this piece of fabric off. We will leave the foam and that piece of batting, that thinner piece of batting, just to soften the edges on top, and we'll go ahead and recover it with some fabric on top of that. Okay, so where I keep all of my stuff in storage, I have it covered so that when I'm cutting stuff with a saw, all of the sawdust doesn't get into any of my good stuff. So what I have is this is just a canvas. It's just a canvas that I bought at Menards. It's a painter's canvas. I'm sure it was less than $20. It's a giant canvas, but I love the seam that's in this here. And so what I'm gonna do is just go ahead and cut out a chunk of that, because I want that seam to be part of the chair cover. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut out a large piece right here in the seam. I'm gonna wash it up good before I put it on the chair so it's nice and clean. I think I've got a little bit of paint residue and stuff on the back side. So I'm gonna go ahead and throw it in the washing machine, get it cleaned up. Some of the stains, if they stay on there after they're washed, I don't think I'm gonna mind those too much. So we'll see how that goes. We're gonna add a stencil to it also, but just kind of wanted to show you this canvas that you can purchase, really any painter's canvas at Menards or wherever, but this one does happen to have a really nice seam in it, and so I'm going to go ahead and take that seam out of this one and cut out a nice square to use. Alright, we are on to the covering the seat process. So again, I tore apart an old seat, and this is the backing, the piece of wood, and then there is a foam layer, and then a little bit of batting on the top of that just to soften all the edges. So we took off the old fabric that was on here. I didn't care for the look of that at all, and I decided to recover it with a painter's tarp. So this is a tarp that I just had in the garage. I had it kind of covering some of my storage stuff so that I wouldn't get sawdust in it, and I went ahead and cut out a piece with the seam in it. This painter's tarp is stuff that you can purchase really anywhere, pretty much anywhere at lumber yards or where you can buy paint supply products. Relatively inexpensive. You can get a really small one, probably less than $10. You can get much bigger ones for $20 to $30 to $40, depending on how big you want to get it. But for this one, I just cut out one of the corners out of this tarp that I had in the garage, and I wanted to make sure that I got the seam in it because I really like the look of that. And then we're going to go ahead and stencil on here some numbers. I thought that would kind of give it a neat look when it goes on the chair. So when I cut this out, I really, as you can see, if you can see where the fold is on this, I wanted it to not be exactly centered. I wanted this line to set off just a little bit from center, because we're going to go ahead and put our numbers on this edge. So I'm going to go as far as I can and still get this side tucked under. So I'm right now just kind of laying it on there to determine where I want to put all my numbers. And I think that looks like I can get it tucked around there pretty good. And it's still off-centered just enough. I really like the way that looks there. So we're going to go ahead and stick with that for our placement, I think, on it. Yep, that looks pretty good. That's just a little off-center, but still will fit our numbers along this side. And so I'm setting it on there so I can see where it's going to lay. And then I'm going to take my stencil and lay that on here and kind of determine where we want the numbers to be first, and mark this, and then take it off the chair, and then we'll go ahead and stencil paint on here with some fabric paint. So I just want the numbers to fall right underneath the seam. So if you can see where the stitching is right here, I want this end to line up with that. And then on these stencils, I got this stencil at probably Michael's. It may have been Hobby Lobby, but I'm sure you can purchase it online as well. And then it has this line going down the center of it, and we want to line that up with this line of our chair. So that's kind of how I'm determining where I'm marking this. And then I want this N to run off the end. So once we unfold our fabric, we're gonna go ahead and stencil brush and paint that N on there. But when it's tucked under, that N will just kind of wrap around the back of the chair on that fabric when it's folded. So that's kind of how I'm determining what we're doing here. And I'm gonna go with using this NO for the number. And then I think we're gonna go with 62. I really like the 6 and I really like the 2, and I thought together that would look pretty nice. They just look like they would go well together. So all I'm doing is just taking a pencil and marking where I want this N to be, so then I can come back in and lay this out flat off of our seat and paint. So I'm just putting a little pencil mark right there. It's gonna get covered up with paint, so that's not a big deal, but I do wanna mark it. And I think that looks pretty even, and about for my placement, that's where I want that N to run off of there. I think that looks good, like that. So we're gonna go ahead and stick with that for, that's a final answer on that one. And then we'll go ahead and just take this fabric off of our seat and set the seat aside. And now we can lay this out nice and flat and go ahead and stencil on a flat surface, so we're not working with having all that foam and all the bends in it and stuff. This will give us a nice flat surface, and we can run our numbers all the way off the edge. So we'll go ahead and line that back up right there. Make sure our line is straight. I think that looks really good right about there. So now we're gonna mix up our paint, and the legs of this chair are kind of they're a dark wood. Well, you guys saw it at the beginning of the video, but it's a dark wood, but then it just kind of is sanded and then weathered. And so I'm gonna try to get a paint color that is similar to those tones, but a much lighter version of it. So I'm gonna put my paint on here over here so I don't splatter all over that fabric. So what I'm gonna do first is add a little bit of brown, and this one is not a fabric paint, but the majority of the coloring that we're going to use is a fabric paint, so I'm gonna take my chances with just using a little bit of brown because I want that hue in there. I wanna pull the brown in just a little bit. And then this fabric paint is just the tulip fabric paint. You can get it at Walmart or any craft store. So I'm gonna go with the black and white to get kind of a nice light gray color. So I want quite a bit of white in it. And then just a hint of black so we get a little bit of that gray tone to it. It's not just a light brown, it's a little gray brown. So we're gonna see how that looks once we get that all mixed up. And you know, paint like this is cheap enough that you guys can kind of just play with it until you get the right coloring. And you will want to make sure that you either remember your formula or kind of how you did it, or mix up enough so that you don't run out as you're doing this. Because once you start stenciling and then you've got to try to mix up another color, that could be bad if it doesn't quite match. You know, I mean, you can always come back over and re-stencil it, but what I'm hoping to do on this one, and I've never tried this, but I'm hoping it works out okay, is to stencil this paint color on here and then kind of wash it in the sink after it's dry. I'm gonna let it dry for a couple days, and then I'm gonna wash it in the sink and try to get some of the paint to come back off. So I'm gonna maybe scrub brush it a little bit and try to get it just to soften. See how that works. Possibly even wash it again, but I think that's about the right color, actually. I think that's a nice soft color. I might add just a little bit more brown to that. It's a little bit gray, but that's pretty close. I don't want it to be too much contrast against the white. I just want it to show up. We're running out of brown paint here. There we go. Well, that was a lot of brown paint, but that's all right. We can add more white. I think we're gonna have to. That's just a little darker than I wanted to go, but it did pick up more of the brown, so I'm very happy with getting that brown back in there. A little more. Yeah, I like that coloring. I think that's a really pretty color. I just want it to be a little bit lighter, so we're gonna go ahead and add some more white and lighten it back up again. There's so many cute stencils right now that you guys can use, you know, a fun farmhouse design or something too if you're doing. You really kind of recover anything, but when you can find these old chairs, and this one I found with curbside cleanup, so it was free sitting alongside of the road, and I love the look of the legs of it, and I just wanted to kind of have a fun farmhouse look for the seat cover, and it had this mauve and country blue fabric on it that I didn't care for, so we took that off and we're just gonna freshen it up. So there we go. I think that's about the right color for this one. So we're gonna go with that color. And then if you guys haven't used a stencil, these brushes work the best for doing any kind of stenciling. It's worth the investment to try to do it that way. You could possibly do it with just a regular paintbrush, but it really is worth it to try to get a brush like this that's actually made for stenciling. It just works to spread the paint out a little bit better on everything. So we're gonna go ahead and go with the paint. I wanna make sure my pencil mark is completely covered up because I really don't want that to show through. I'm not sure how that would erase on the fabric, so we're gonna get that completely covered up with paint. And I'm just relining it to make sure I'm perfectly straight here. And then we're just gonna go ahead and start all the way on the outside with this end. And then we'll just come in and put the paint on. If you have a table that you don't want the paint to leak through, depending on how thick your fabric is, you might want to put some plastic underneath it just so you don't end up with paint on your table. I'm not too worried about this table. I don't mind that it has some paint and a little bit of wear on it. I think it gives it a neat look anyway, so it's my work table. And then we're just gonna go through like this, and if you start to come up, like this stencil is sitting on this seam, so as you can see it's starting to kind of pull away. Just hold it down in the place exactly where you're working, and then, you know, keep moving as you go. You could tape this down if you wanted to, just to make sure you keep your placement, but as long as you keep holding it in place as you're going, and you do want to make sure you keep it nice and tight, because if you don't hold this stencil down nice and tight to that, and you get too much of an air bubble in there, when you come in to put your paint on it, you are going to end up with some bleeding, and we really don't want that to happen on the back side. So just make sure you keep your stencil held nice and tight to the fabric as you're going. You don't want to have too much pull. If you notice, if you pull like this, you're going to end up with a crease right there across the front. So you want to make sure whatever tension you have on it, keep that all the way across so it's consistent when you flip it back over. Go ahead with the corners. I'm going to show you guys how to do one of these and kind of explain. There's a couple different ways you can do it. You can either come around from one side and then fold it in so you have a seam like this, and that will give you a seam. Get the lighting right so you can see that on your corner, or you can come in and kind of work your way around so you don't have a distinct corner on it or a distinct seam, but it just kind of keeps it rounded on the edges. So if you do it that way, you just want to kind of lay it where you want it and then go ahead and staple all of that fabric into place. So that's the way we're going to do it, and then we won't have Okay, then for the corners, there's several different ways that you can do it. You just want to be sure that however you do one of them, you're going to want to do all of them that way, because if you're going to have a crease in the corner, you want to make sure that it's consistent all the way around and that crease is in the same direction. For these, we're going to go ahead and just work our way around so that it's a nice even fold around the edges. It's kind of nice and rounded, and we don't have a distinct crease in it. So we're just going to kind of pull it right in the center in this way, and then work the fabric around so there's different folds as you come around each side. And then once you get it all in place where you want it, then you go ahead and set it down and staple it all down. And before you staple it, if you want to flip it over and just make sure that that is how you want it to look on the front side, you can do that. And if that's the look you want, otherwise go ahead and change it or mess with it until it is the way you want it to look. But once you've got it laid on there nicely, go ahead and start stapling. And you want to make sure you get all of those pieces stapled down so they stay nice on the corners, especially if somebody sits in this chair. You don't want that to move around later. So add enough staples to hold that down nice and tight. There you go. That's how we'll do our corners, and then just go ahead and continue that on all 4 corners.